All righty. Welcome to the podcast.
You know what thought I just had?
Tell me.
I can't believe we don't have a new song.
I had that thought a second ago, too. I didn't say anything. So
I know.
we've had the
I was
same
sitting there
song for a
listening
long
to it
time.
going, how has this thing lasted this long?
It's consistency,
I guess.
familiarity, laziness, probably a little bit.
And the hammering that we hear.
Yeah.
I wonder what that is.
It's them digging. I think they're all the way up, like on the other side of the student building. Maybe there's another one.
And so that's
But
what we're
because
hearing?
Yeah.
That's your
The
new
pipes.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's off beat and it's killing me. But but yeah. Like the pipes run all the way from down there to up here. So they're hammering around the pipes up there
And that's carrying all the way down
reverberating,
here.
yeah.
That's crazy, man.
You remember that one week it was really loud?
Yeah.
They were out
They were
front,
just out. Yeah.
but it's still, it sounded like someone was upstairs hitting something with a hammer.
Yeah.
That's wild.
How'd you like today in staff meeting when I said, oh, there's the rebar? like I knew what I was talking about. I almost called it rebarb.
Big old truckload.
I don't think it's a rebar. Rebarb.
Rebar.
B-A-R.
I'm not sure.
Rebar.
Yeah. I'm not a construction man, but I do know it's not rebarb.
Yeah, speaking of bar, not that we should talk about that kind of stuff on a podcast, but what about John calling my shirt out today?
I noticed you
That's pretty
changed.
funny.
Well,
Which is partially 'cause you're cold.
I changed because I was freezing. Because it was like 65 degrees this morning,
Yeah.
and now it's like 50 and the wind blowing. You know, it's cold.
I got up and it said the temperature outside is 61 degrees with a high of 61 degrees and a low of 30.
Yeah. Yeah, the high was at
6:30 in the morning.
6:30, 7 o'clock this morning, and it went down from there. Yeah, I mean, John, what's he doing, dude? Why does he want to bring...
Jeff had a nice coastal golf shirt, beach golf shirt.
It is nice. Very nice. I love the
festive
colors.
occasions.
That may have had some bottles on it.
I think that's still up for debate.
Jeff's response was, "Oh, it's suntan lotion,"
Yeah.
because that makes it better.
I've never
like-
seen suntan lotion in a square glass
in a
bottle.
fancy with a big top on it.
Big
That was a big old jug of suntan lotion too.
That's awesome. You remember I had a shirt. I just thought it was funny, but it had a bunch of condiments on it. It was like ketchup
Yes.
and mustard and
Yeah, I
hot sauce
think
and all
I do.
stuff. And I wore it the first week I wore it. Someone was like, "Do you have beer bottles all over your shirt?" Like they were convinced.
Nice.
So, yeah. Sunday morning, just wearing my beer shirt up to
Wearing
the
your
church.
beer
to
shirt,
lead
playing
worship.
in the worship service.
That old
Rock and roll.
that rock and roll
Yeah.
service.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Oh man.
Hats and shirts with beer bottles on them. There you go.
We also had we were down here a second ago talking before we started recording,
Man.
and the fire alarm went off.
Fire alarm went off big time.
So I
You
don't
know what's
if they're-
funny is that Patty never got out of her seat.
She didn't.
The
She
thing
literally
was just
said,
going,
"I'm just
Why
going to
would
sit
I?"
here."
She's like, yeah, tell me what y'all find.
Yeah. No sense of urgency here.
No.
Patty,
not
the
at all.
building's burning down.
What?
But the sprinkler's like, I didn't know there's a sprinkler in here. It didn't.
Oh, that would have been bad.
Yeah, that would have been horrible. Oh, there's one right above Patty's head.
Yeah.
That would have been
See?
awesome.
Comfortable chair, sprinkler.
Yeah,
I'm good.
That'd have been awesome. Yeah, a little shower. I'm good. Nice.
Yeah, good to know. All right,
Yeah, but it went off. I mean, they cut it off.
I guess. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
if
I don't
they're
know if the
working on something or
Construction
testing.
guys
or
got into it or what. But
who knows? But if it goes off in the middle of this, that would be awesome.
Y'all go
That's
ahead.
all I'm
there you go.
saying. Patty's like, I'll be right here. All right. Well, continuing in Mark, we were talking before. I think you could argue that this is an example of time travel in the Bible.
What
do you think?
Man,
The Transfiguration.
You know, what a great story though. And I love reading Mark through the eyes of Peter,
Yeah.
because you can just hear Peter tell, because Mark was not an eyewitness to these things,
Right.
and so you've got Peter telling Mark these stories, and you know, in theological circles we say that, and Peter was the primary source for Mark, and I'm sure that there were other corroborations that Mark got, but Peter is his primary source, and so
Yeah.
he's telling him all of these stories, and you know they're just through his, because what's really neat is when you read these same stories in this other synoptic gospels like Matthew and Luke, there'll be details that Peter shares that the other ones won't.
Mm.
So you know it's just kind of his perspective, his experience. And I love when Peter said, I just said what I said because I was terrified and didn't know what to say. That he included that part instead of just saying what he said. But it's Mark's been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been good
walking through this gospel.
But yeah, it's the transfiguration of Jesus. You asked before, I think we all wonder the question, like, what did Jesus look like when he went from his human form into this future glorified body form?
Well, like we were talking about earlier, what's really
time travel.
Yeah, it's hard to think about, and I love that is this idea that Jesus was presented. He transfigured into his glorified state, which hadn't happened yet. And so it wasn't like he was going back to what he was before he came, because before he came, he didn't have a body. He only got a body when he got here, and then he went back to heaven with a heavenly glorified body. But somehow that body shows up at the transfiguration. So he went through this metamorphosis at that moment in time. Now, what's interesting to think, though, is when he went back down to the mountain, he was just Jesus again.
Yeah.
So it's man, there's so much of that you don't understand. And again, I go back to Alistair Begg's statement: the main thing is the plain thing, right? The plain thing is the main thing. So there's a lot of that around there. We want to try to start thinking through and figuring out, and how did this happen? How did that happen? And if it's not plain, we don't need to worry about how it didn't, what did or didn't, and how, because you're missing the whole point. We get into the details and we start missing the point of the scripture.
Yeah, for sure. Well, jumping into it, we didn't have any questions again this week. I don't know if that just means people don't like our answers, but we hadn't, last couple of weeks we hadn't got any.
I think there's been I think last week was just really self-explanatory.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just very, I love the way Jesus just said, hey, if you want to follow me, here's what it takes. Boom, 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 boom. Here's who I am. Here's what I've got to go through. And here's what it means for you to follow me. That was just as plain as day. This one, I think, is just so complicated. What are you going to ask?
I thought for sure there'd be one on this one, though. Just thinking of the transfiguration and like Jesus fully changing form in front of their eyes. Like I figured there'd be, but
yeah.
But regardless, 3 weeks in a row. I mean, before that too, but 3 weeks in a row of just like gut punches. It feels like not just that you're gut punching, but scripture just speaking for itself, and very applicable, very relevant to what we're walking through. But great message this week talking about getting into God's glory. So to start us off, I just wrote down a few questions kind of getting into it. First one I wrote is, if encountering the glory of God is the goal, so we talked about the goal not being a style or a service or a performance or a message or whatever it may be, but the encountering God's glory is the goal. If encountering the glory of God is the goal, then why do we have music at all? We could go a bunch of different routes. But you've got
I think that's a really good question. And I think when the beauty of that is we can look back to the Old Testament, and which was framed back then as the law and the prophets, and see that in their worship, it's so interesting to think that they had worship and instruction for worship. And throughout the Psalms, you see this worship experience of them having this and having instruments.
Yeah.
And so I think, everything that has been created, God created it. Satan doesn't create stuff.
Right.
And I think Satan takes God's creation and he perverts God's creation, and he distorts God's creation and all of those things, but he doesn't create things. He's not a creative being. So all of this to say, all of these things are made for his glory. So creation was made for his glory, right? So creation was supposed to and will cry out to him. Jesus even said, man, if they don't worship me, the rocks will cry out. So all of this was supposed to be for God's glory, and then sin came into the world and tainted it. and so as we think about like your question, why music? We could pursue God's glory without music. But I think all of these things enhances the experience that we have in seeking and experiencing His glory.
Yeah.
So I think I think they can be distractions, but I think it helps us and it enhances us in who we are, because at the end of the day, we are cultural beings.
Yep.
Right? We are cultural beings who grew up in a certain period of time, and that was our cultural experience, and we can't escape that.
Yeah.
Which leads into a lot of other conversation around this point that we were talking about earlier. This whole picture of the transfiguration was all about Jesus and Him radiating the glory of the Father. So Jesus is the ultimate display of God's glory. So when you think about it that way, for God to display His glory. So I love the concept. I didn't have time to get into this, but I really love the idea of Moses and his desire to see God's glory in Exodus 33, coming to the end of his ministry. And he's like, just show me your glory. Like, I just want to, and I have so many questions about that. How did Moses know to ask that? Like, how did Moses know to be a pursuer of God's glory?
Right.
Now, let's back up and think about that for a second. I could probably answer my own question to a degree. Moses had some pretty neat interactions with God, right? I mean, he's walking through and he sees this bush and it's on fire, but it's not burning up. So you got that.
Yep.
And then you got this voice coming out of the bush. Take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. You've got that experience. Then you've got, Moses, just to go back up before, then you've got the deliverance, you've got the plagues, you've got the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, my goodness, Moses had some amazing experiences with God. And even the Bible says that God would speak to Moses as a friend. So he had this relationship with God that was so unique. So I think Moses probably had a bead on that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah.
And he wanted more.
Yeah.
God, show me your glory. Show me your glory. And what's interesting is that, and God said to him, you can't handle the glory.
Yeah.
I love that because it sounds like so much like that movie line, right? You can't handle the truth. and we can't. At that point in time, God's glory, not because, and I think this is where people get a little skewed on this. Like when God says, when you read in the Old Testament, God says, if I come down to the earth, everybody will be destroyed. People think that means, well, God is mad and he's having a fit and he's going to come down here and destroy everybody. When you talk about the impassibility of God, God is not affected by human emotion. God doesn't respond to human emotion like we respond to human emotion. Right? He doesn't get mad and come down here and destroy everybody. Everybody would be destroyed because of who he is and who we are. He's God, and his glory would just destroy us because we're sinful creatures.
Yeah.
And so even Moses, is as much as God loved Moses, and Moses led the people out of Israel, out of Egypt to the edge of the promised land, Moses could not see God's glory. He said, I'm going to let my goodness pass by you and let you kind of see the backside of my garment. So, but yet somehow Peter, James, and John could see the glory.
Yeah.
So how could they see the glory? And they weren't consumed, but Moses was.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because it was coming through Jesus. So think about this. And this is another way for us to think about what Jesus at that point would do for us. But somehow in the future already anyway, so we don't get into that conversation, right? But what Jesus would do for us to allow us to be in his glory is if God came down to the earth before Christ, we would all be consumed because of our sinfulness and his response to that.
Yeah.
Okay, something had to step in and appease that or take that away or buffer that for us so that we would not be destroyed by that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Jesus did for us.
Yeah.
Jesus came and he satisfied that aspect of God's character so that we would have an opportunity to be in God's presence. Think about this. Adam and Eve were in the presence of God.
Yeah.
They walked in the garden with God by the cool of the day. Think about that. They had such an intimate relationship with God. And then sin came into the world. And then it became this world that if God shows up, everything gets destroyed.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden you've got Jesus coming onto the scene, and then Jesus does what he does. Like in this moment, Peter, James, and John are seeing the glorified Jesus. They're seeing the glory of God coming through Jesus. The reason it didn't consume them is because it came through Jesus. So it's just a beautiful picture of we would be consumed by God in his glory if it hadn't been for Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to contain what they're seeing. You know what I mean? It's hard to describe it and try to do it any kind of justice. And I think that's why the gospel writers, that's why we still have question about, man, what really was it? You know, because I don't think they knew how to contain that. I mean, Peter didn't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
He described it the best he could. I mean, Peter's description is, dude, you can't bleach clothes that white. I mean, that's Peter's description. Yeah. Like you can't wash clothes and get them that white. Like I've never seen that white before.
Yeah.
You know, that's what he saw. So that's the only way he had to describe it.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's and to me, it's interesting that I don't think he went there to meet with Elijah and Moses because of what was coming. So God was just fulfilling his plan. And this moment in time, Jesus is glorified. Elijah and Moses show up. You've got the lawgiver and you've got the prophets. You've got both really major components of God's revelation to mankind at that point. Because you have all three right there. Think about that. You have the law, you have the prophets, and you have Jesus.
Yeah, the fulfiller.
Man, so you've got the lawgiver, you've got the prophet, the voice of God speaking to the people. Then you've got Jesus, the fulfiller of all of this, and they're all leading to, hey, Jesus, you know what he was going to face.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty amazing picture with what was happening.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you got Peter, James, and John. Like you don't hear anything from James and John throughout this. You know, you just hear Peter talking.
Yeah, probably because their jaws were on the floor. Like, what am I looking at right now?
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's wild. Another thought to the kind of music side of things. I've probably talked about this on here before. Obviously, music is a passion of mine, and worship through music. It's what I do. But one of the unique things about worshiping through music is just in itself a very emotional thing. So when you take scripture, which is scripture theology, what we believe, this head knowledge, and you pair it with this emotional side that appeals to our heart, when those are paired together, man, it makes this incredible kind of concoction that when we sing and when we relate to that, we have really an encounter and experience that often connects at a deeper level, because we're connecting that head knowledge to our heart, which stays with us and often comes up in difficult times of life, that we're able to remember songs when we're walking through stuff and whatever it may be. But yeah, just about the glory of God. I love applying that to music and what that looks like. To kind of take a step back though, what do we mean? Let's just go very base level. What do we even mean when we talk about the glory of God?
Yeah.
Because we talk about that a lot in church. You know, if you talk about beauty, that makes sense. If you talk about brains, someone's very smart, that makes sense. But no one here is gloriful. No one here has. So what does it mean when we actually talk about the glory of God or use that terminology?
Could we stop and talk about the word you just created?
Gloriful?
Gloriful.
Glorious.
Like,
that's
man,
the word.
Yeah.
I was like, there's one in there.
It's like gloriful, man. That's
gloriful.
Wow. That's a great word. I'll have to use that. Man, I think it's a great question, because it seems like one of those religious words you use that you just kind of accept. You kind of know what you're talking about, but you really don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, what does that mean? And I think it means, to me, I think it means, it's the only way we know how to describe seeking Him and all that He is. You know, when you think about, because it's really His presence.
Yeah.
is what it is. It's kind of this unmeasurable presence of knowing that you are, something is happening, things are happening, things are moving, you're feeling and you're sensing something. So I think it engages a lot of our emotion, but I think it engages everything, our cognitive, our emotional, and it takes you out of who you are to something higher and bigger and greater. It really is hard to explain, but that's just for me how I think about it. As I think about, okay, so what? Because here's what happens if you're not careful. If you're not careful, and we talked about this earlier, we as a church, I think church in general, over my course of time, have taught people to pursue the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start pursuing the wrong things, and those things become very objective and tangible, then you become very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And I'm pragmatic. So I'm not against pragmatism to a degree, but I think you've got to be really careful when we get so pragmatic that we're losing this sense of awe and wonder of the glory of God.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that just God's presence shows up, and when His presence shows up, things happen that you can't manufacture yourself. You know, there's you can't move people's hearts and their souls and their minds, and you can't engage all of those things. Like humanly, we can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you attempt to do that, you get into manipulation, which you can manipulate people 100%. But that always has a horrible ending, and it'll show itself up there. You know, it kind of goes back to the tree and the fruit, right? It'll show itself up eventually. And when you teach people, like we've taught people, to pursue the wrong thing, and they pursue the process instead of the product.
Mm.
Right? So we've taught people to pursue and desire and fight for process, because we are pragmatic people instead of the product.
Yeah.
Right? We should be so tied to God's glory and pursuing God's glory and wanting to see Jesus every single time we come to church. It really doesn't matter how it gets there.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say that we're not going to be organized, and there are some things that we have instruction in Scripture on what to do and how to do. But it really shouldn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But we've convinced people and told people that your opinion is so important that we're going to make sure we do everything to make sure you stay happy so that we can keep you coming. So so when you get into that kind of pattern and that kind of trap, dude, you're always having to feed it.
Yeah.
You know, a guy told me years and years ago, and this was really in the context of student ministry, but it works for all of church, is what you catch somebody with is what you're going to have to keep somebody with.
Right.
So whatever you catch them with, you're going to have to keep them with it. So like in the student ministry world, the way we translated that was, man, if you're catching a bunch of kids with big events and all that kind of stuff, then you're going to have to do that to keep them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've translated that into church. So whatever you catch people with, whatever you hook people with, if it's their worship preference or whatever it is, you're going to have to keep doing that to keep them, right? Because they'll eventually find some other place that'll fit their personal niche or personal need. Mm. And so, man, what about this? What about just catching people and hooking people and connecting people to the glory of God? To just I just want to go to this place, and the reason I come to this place is because I love the community of this body of believers that every Sunday morning is pursuing and seeking the glory of God. Like they want to see the glory of Jesus every single time they come, and they don't really care how it happens and how it's delivered. Man, they just want to see His glory. Mm-hmm. So just show us your glory, and that's all we want. Like that would be the deal. Not let's go hear this particular worship leader. Let's go hear this particular preacher. Let's go hear this particular whatever. Man, Lord, our end goal is to be in the midst of your glory, in your presence. And now I would love for people, and I think we're turning our people's hearts more toward that. And I think our people are starting to listen. You don't change years and years and years and years of church process, in a year or two. You just don't. I mean, you've got to train people because, you're working against the flesh. So that's the enemy. So we're working against, all of us have that, working against the enemy. You got to keep pursuing and keep pressing and keep pointing people to Jesus and his glory. Now, that takes a lot of willingness to say, I'm not going to draw you to me. Right? Like all three of us are on the platform on any given Sunday. I'm not going to draw you to me. I want to draw you to God and his glory. I want you to see Jesus is the ultimate manifestation of God's glory. So at the end of the day, I want you to see Jesus. And so everything we do has to point to him. That puts a lot of pressure on us, right? So that should drive us in our personal walk with him, in our personal preparation. We start mailing it in. Guess what? People know that. You sense that. Like that's where you end up with dead services, because you're not putting anything into it. We're not putting anything into it. I mean, if we start rehashing things and just pulling stuff out, mailing it in, guess what's going to happen? Man, you're going to sense and feel that, And so I think for us, and I'm not saying that God's glory is dependent on our delivery, but I will tell you this, and I believe this is true. I think that Jesus chooses where he's going to show up and where he doesn't. Like I don't think it's a plug and play. Do y'all? I mean, do you guys think every time we show up, just because we show up and we sing songs and we deliver a message, that there's a guarantee that the presence of Jesus is going to show up?
The presence, I mean, there's the scripture that says that when two or more are gathered, obviously the presence is there, but the glory may be another question. Like, are we actually seeking his glory, seeking him in worship or through whatever means, or is it that we're just showing up and doing a couple things because that's what we've been told to do?
Well, so what are some things that people can seek when they come here? Like what? Like, what do you think? And again, that we got to be careful because I don't want to knock our people, because at the end of the day, they're doing what they've been trained to do.
For sure.
Right. So do our people wake up on Sunday morning and come here and leave here and go home and go, man, that was good. Like, that was awesome. Okay. What makes it awesome?
Yeah. I think part of it is we've in some ways conditioned, and this is across the board. This isn't to a specific time period, service, generation, like whatever. I think we want to feel something. And sometimes I think we have equated that feeling or that emotion. I just talked about music having that emotive side. So like if we feel something, then man, God really moved today. Did he, or did the music just draw an emotion out of you? And so then we've become trained. I want to go back to what you were saying earlier. The process to the product. Another way to say that is you've got a means to an end. The end is God's glory.
Right.
The means is worship. It's the message. It's community. It's our Sunday school classes. It's digging in his word. Like, it's all of these things that we have on Sunday mornings, but we make these things the end.
Right.
And there's no like getting to God's glory, but when we feel something in the music, well, man, that was really good today.
Yeah.
But did we really see God's glory, and did he actually show up and reveal something to us, or did we just feel something in our hearts?
Yeah. So you're telling me it's possible to come to church, have like, for example, like we go home and Julie will say, because she comes to 10 o'clock service, Julie will say, man, worship was really good today. Okay, so what does that mean? Does it mean the band was on? Does that mean everybody hit their cues?
Right.
Does it mean
transitions were good?
Were good. Does it mean, man, vocal was awesome, sound was mixed well? Or does that mean that, man, God's glory showed up in the midst of our worship and we experienced him? That's what it should mean.
Yeah.
And I think that's what she means when she says that. But if we're not, see, here's where the tension comes in. Like, y'all can't be up there not knowing your transitions, not hitting your parts, not doing all those things, and us go, well, that's okay, man. God's glory will assist you. No, because those things become distractions, right?
Right.
Like, yeah. So our lack of preparation could inhibit
Yep.
somebody experiencing what Jesus wants them to experience.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wrote down in that first question about the music side of things, is when music divides the church or hinders our worship. So distracts, takes us off course, replaces God's glory. That's when it may be time to rethink what we're doing. Like,
Yeah.
music's great, but if it has become the main thing, then we need to rethink what we're doing. Production can, the lights, bringing the lights down, bringing the lights up, whatever, that can communicate something and can help drive home a point. But if that becomes the point, then we missed the mark. And
Right.
we need to rethink what we're doing. So,
But doesn't it come down to, though, like if you don't start right, if you don't get people pursuing the right thing, then you're never going to get there. You're
Absolutely.
never going to end there. If we've trained people and we've given people the opportunity to pursue personal opinions and preferences, and that's what's important, then whether or not God shows up is irrelevant.
yeah.
Whether or not God's glory shows up and does anything is irrelevant,
Yep.
because we've taught people that this is what you pursue and this is why you come, and as long as it's what you like, then it must be good. God's glory it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because we had church.
Wow.
Like, we went through church. But we've taught people that.
Yep.
Like, where are we teaching people to man, don't leave until he shows up. And expect it every Sunday. And let's have that kind of expectation that, man, we're going to see. No, we don't have to go to church to see God, or we don't have to go to church to be in the midst of his glory. But there's no better place to come with a body of people. I think this is why corporate worship is so important. Corporate worship is that opportunity where multiple people get together and God's glory shows up and amazing things happen. I mean, that should impact a community.
Yep.
I mean, like when in the Old Testament, when they would go to the tent of meeting and meet in the tent of meeting, people, it said, would stand outside of their tent. They couldn't go, they couldn't watch, they couldn't go, but they would stand on the outside of their tent just to watch what was happening in that tent,
Wow.
because they knew God was there. So how many people in this neighborhood? Think about that, dude. How many people in this neighborhood are standing on their porches, looking toward Emmanuel because they know God's there?
Yeah.
Or is it just another cultural experience
Yeah.
that we have because it's what we do on Sundays?
Right.
You know what I mean?
And that goes for any church in this
Yeah, 100%.
community.
That's
yeah.
right.
I mean, that's just not,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, so you've got this experience where the norm was Jesus in his glory, magnifying the glory of his Father, speaking with Elijah, speaking with Moses about this plan that God had put in place from the beginning of time that Jesus is about to fulfill. And you got these three guys watching it. So why did he take Peter, James, and John?
Are you asking me?
I mean, he yeah,
I don't know.
he could have gone by himself.
Yeah.
I mean, he regularly went off by himself to pray and do those types of
Right.
things.
I think coming off of, the past few chapters where Jesus is leading up to this point, I am who I say I am, but I've got to go through this. For me, looking at those disciples, it is not only a revelation or affirmation of who I am, but what's to come. There's hope in the transfiguration, that they're witnessing. So I think it's, I want to say edification, but definitely hope. I've got to go through this. I will leave you. I will return, but there's hope.
Yeah. No, I
Because
think,
it would be
yeah,
easy to get bogged down
right.
with all the heaviness that they've
Right.
encountered. And that's the same for us.
Yeah. Well, and I think it was a part of their discipleship because Peter, James, and John, obviously those guys would become early great leaders of the New Testament church. So Jesus is preparing these guys for what they would have to do when he was gone. Right? They're going to get exposed to things. They're going to see things. They're going to experience things about Jesus that are going to help them once they understand. That's the thing. There's a really good, if you kind of look on the other side of this and just look at it from a discipleship standpoint, Jesus was revealing things to Peter, James, and John that they couldn't understand at that point, but it didn't keep him from revealing that to them. So you got to remember that. Raising your kids, discipling people, it really doesn't make any sense to do this because they don't understand. Well, don't tell Jesus that. Because Peter, James, and John definitely didn't understand that. But it didn't keep Jesus from doing that. But because Jesus knew there would be a day where they would understand that. They would get that. Like, we serve the glorified Jesus. As a matter of fact, we saw him before he ever went to the cross. So there are things that we're seeing and experiencing about Jesus that I think would help them, give them strength once they started getting into the ministries that they were going to lead. Which were going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter was in Rome, of all places.
Yep.
So you could imagine what that would have been like. So I think it's interesting. And again, it's easy to kind of want to get wrapped up in the event itself. But I think what we needed to hear is their response. And of course, Peter's the guy who becomes the spokesperson for, the other three.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just wonder if he just did that, or they were like, "Hey, Peter, you're going to say," or the other two were like,
"You've already denied him. You're already in the doghouse."
James and John. I mean, you got James, the brothers, the sons of thunder, up there with Peter.
Yeah.
But man, Peter's the spokesperson, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. So, kind of on that note that we were talking about, and then at the end of the message, you got to how they wanted to remain, they wanted to contain. How do we, like for ourselves or for our churches, whatever it may be, how do we know what we are coming to expect and when we are trying to contain the wrong things or contain God's glory or remain in his glory instead of sharing that to a lost generation?
Yeah.
How do we look inwardly and judge for ourselves, like, am I actually going after the right things? Am I seeking God's glory? Am I encountering his glory, or am I just feeling moved by an emotion of a moment or whatever it may be?
Yeah. Well, I think I think the only way that we can, I say the only way I know that we can determine that is the outcome. Because I think there are a lot of times we experience something, and for us to know, man, am I experiencing the right thing? The big question would be, what is it leading me to do? Because I think if we're truly experiencing God's glory in the way that Jesus wants us to, it's going to lead us to the harvest fields, right? It's going to lead us to serving and now, and I don't want to say it's going to lead us to bearing the fruit of the Spirit, because that should be happening anyway, because the Spirit lives in us, right? So we don't try to produce the fruit of the Spirit does that. But I do think it should lead us toward the heart of God, the heart of Jesus, to love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, love our neighbors ourselves. And so, if it's leading me to fight for something that's not indicative of his glory, then I'm not experiencing the right thing.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to what we've taught people to pursue and have a passion for, and it's not the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean, when you've got churches that are dying, churches that are splitting, churches that are, really having problems over this kind of stuff, like worship style or whatever, man, you can't look at that and say that's pursuing God's glory, because that brings God no glory. It brings God no glory whatsoever when a church fights and has problems and splits and shuts their doors because, they're not going to do what they need to do to keep reaching their community. And again, I think that's it. You see a church that may change over time, but that church has to change over time to continue to reach the people in communities that are changing over time. Right? God's glory doesn't change. God's truth doesn't change. But who we become, like I've seen churches that are in transitional neighborhoods, and what's been really awesome is to see a church being willing to transition to the people that they need to reach in their community. And not hang on to, this is who we are. I've seen churches try to hang on to that. Everybody's kind of flown out of the area, but they want to still drive back into town to go to their old church they're hanging on to. when that church is surrounded by people that they fail to reach.
Yeah.
How's that pursuing God's glory? So again, I think we know we're pursuing God's glory when we reflect, I think, the attitude and the direction that God gave us.
Yeah.
And when we're not, man, you're not pursuing God's glory.
Right.
Like, you can't say that you're pursuing God's glory and you're fighting to hang on to something that is driven by, personal preference and not the passion and vision of Jesus.
Yeah.
That you're not pursuing God's glory in doing that.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
I don't think I've ever looked at this passage this way, in particular with Peter's response of remaining here. Why can't we just hang out here? It's great. It's amazing. I think I went more of the following traditional law or commandment route. Would Peter have recognized the presence of these figures all together in one place as, hey, the end of times is near.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys, I'm going to set up a booth for you guys because you shouldn't have to do it yourself. So I've always seen that more as a reverent thing and a realization of times to come.
Yeah.
So help me out there.
Yeah, no, I think this was happening during what they called the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Tents. Where they would set up tents, they would stay in tents to remember, what they did in their wilderness wanderings,
which had been observed for centuries.
Yeah, which had been,
and he knew that,
and he knew that.
Yeah.
And so in his mind, his perspective is. And I think you don't know that until you read ahead and know what was happening down in the valley. And I think that's what Jesus was, again, going back to what does it lead to?
Yeah.
Is if we're strictly looking at God's glory for our own personal benefit, then we want to stay on top of the mountain with all the right figures, and we just want to kind of bask in the glory. And Jesus shows them pretty quickly, hey, if you're really pursuing me, this is where you're going to be. You're going to be in the valley, because your other 9 brothers are down there just getting destroyed while we're up here having a revival. Peter, this wasn't to show you how good it's going to be. I just, and this is my perspective, Jesus. I'm just inviting you, Peter, to something I'm doing, and I wanted you to see it because you need to understand what you're a part of. You're a part of something that my Father started thousands of years ago. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bring a couple guys in that are from that time period that represented what my Father was doing in the life of the Israelites over the last couple of thousand years. Here's Moses, the lawgiver, and here's Elijah. I mean, think those guys would have been heroes of those guys.
Right.
I mean, Moses and Elijah were the 2 heroes of Jewish faith. They represented the 2 major components of how God revealed himself during that Old Testament period. And so, I think Peter's heart was, and I think this is where we can get. Peter's heart was this: don't get any better than this. Didn't get any better than this. I mean, and we've all been in services. We've all had experiences where we went, I just can't see how it gets any better than this.
Or we fast track to, this is the sign of the times.
Yes, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I think Peter just said, man, let's just freeze this moment in time. And Jesus, and I love Jesus because I think his perspective is, Peter, you hadn't seen anything yet. Don't short side yourself because, this is good, but this isn't anywhere like what is coming. But right now, you got 9 brothers down in the valley who a poor dad who loves his son desperately brought him to them, and they're not being successful. They're not having your experience, Peter. So I need you to take what you've seen. I need you to go back down to the valleys and do what I've commanded you to do. I think that's where it shows up.
For sure.
Yep, absolutely. So one last question for us to kind of wrap it all up, especially when it comes. So we talked about the contain, and like we're talking about here with Peter wanting to remain. Often we have songs about, I just want to be in your presence. I just want to sit here in your presence. Show us more. And we sing these songs and are taught that we should learn to remain in his presence, to be in his presence, to just sometimes even sit still. We get so busy that sometimes we just need to sit in his presence.
I think God said, "Be still and know that I am God."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We do a terrible job of doing
Right.
sometimes.
Right.
So how do we balance that of being in God's presence and remaining and resting and knowing that we're held there, while not falling to Peter's side of just wanting to remain and becoming stagnant in that?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a great balance there. I think what Jesus was trying to probably help Peter and these guys see is like the one thing we have to do, and this is why personal devotion is so important, personal prayer is so important, that personal connection to Christ is so important, is we've got to constantly be reminded of who we are and who he is. Like you got to constantly, you've got to constantly keep your eye on, I don't want to say the prize because that's kind of a weird way to say it, but on who he is. Okay. Because if you're not doing that, you can lose sight of the journey, right? Because what we know we're going to face every single day of our life, if we look at it this way, is the difficulties that life brings us because we live in a fallen world. Now we've been given a commission. We're to go and make disciples. Like that's we shouldn't question what we're here to do.
Yeah.
We're supposed to go and make disciples. And we talked about this. I mean, a lot. Baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them everything I've commanded you to do. And lo, I'm with you even to the end of age. So we know what we're supposed to do. And so we go out and we live our lives every single day pursuing what he's called us to do. He said the fields are white unto harvest. Go out into the fields, reap the harvest. Like, so we know what we're supposed to do. Well, the only way for us to do that is to keep our eye on who he is and who we are in him. Because if you don't do that, you forget real quickly and you start getting sucked into, man, I'm just a product of the world. I'm a victim of the world. All this bad stuff is happening to me. Nobody's here. You know, like the world will do that to you.
Yeah.
Just like that. So if you're not constantly reminded, hey, this is who I am, this is who he is, and this is who I am because of who he is, and this is what he's done for me, and this is, so I'm reminded. Because again, like for example, if you get taken somewhere else and you get put 4,000 miles away from here, and you're away from your family, but you've been sent on a mission, you better be remembering who you are. Because if you don't remember who you are, the culture you go to will draw you in. You'll become one of them. You'll completely forget why you're there. And I think that's exactly what happens to believers here. Number one, we're not literally told why we're here. You know, we're not given that picture. And then if we're not constantly reminded of who it is that he is and we are, then we let the world suck us in and we become one of them and we completely forget why we're here. So I think these experiences, and I think God wants us to see his glory. He desires for us to see his glory and to experience him. And that's what gives us our energy. That's what lets us know, man, this is something greater than who we are. This doesn't depend on us. You know, we have a responsibility to this place, but it doesn't depend on us. And so we're reminded of that. But man, it's all him. We're pursuing him. We should come here every Sunday morning. And again, let's get back to who the main character is. The main character is Jesus.
Right.
And we should come here looking to see Jesus, waiting, sitting in our chair, in our pew with anticipation to experience Jesus. And the worship is a part of that, and the preaching is a part of that, and whatever else we do is a part of that. And if all of that stuff happens and you don't experience Jesus, then you got something wrong. There's something wrong.
Yep.
And how many people go to how many churches every Sunday and never experience the glory of Jesus?
Yeah.
And we wonder why we're not reaching our communities. So you got to question the target.
Yep.
What are you pursuing? Now, here's where it gets tough. We're pursuing baptisms. Wrong. Wrong.
Yep.
We're pursuing growth. Wrong. We're pursuing Jesus and his glory. And all of those things happen in the context of that. I'm not saying that you're not intentional about those things, but you're not pursuing those things.
Yep.
That's the problem, right? We're pursuing our vision. You need to have one, but if it doesn't lead you to the glory of Jesus, then you're just here's the thing: you're just another business with a religious name, but you're using the same methods to grow.
Mm.
Now, I'm going to tell you, in my lifetime, I've seen us do that to the church.
Mm.
Because I've been in the seeker-friendly, sensitive movement. I've been in the church growth movement. I've seen all the plans. I remember there was a thing we had called the growth spiral. You guys don't know anything about this. This was a church growth plan. And bro, they had it broken down to basically you go out and enroll everybody you can in Sunday school. If you enroll 100 people in Sunday school, 50 will come. So your goal is just to blitz your neighborhoods and you enroll people in a grocery store. You enroll people at Hardee's. You enroll everybody you can. Because this guy figured out if you enroll this many people, this percentage will actually come. If this percentage comes, this percentage will give, this percentage, had it all broken down. Everybody got on the growth spiral. Where's Jesus and all that?
Yep.
Now, I'm not saying, and now here's what's hard is that you have people with really good intentions, that methods become
right.
what you seek and pursue instead of, and those people don't necessarily were intended for that to happen, right? Because again, we've seen it with really good things like True Love Waits and things of that nature, where I know what those dudes' hearts were, but in our flesh, we start pursuing process instead of pursuing Jesus.
For sure.
And so in a church, our goal has to be to pursue Jesus. We just need to pursue Jesus and his glory. Mm-hmm. And man, we're going to have a great kids ministry and student ministry and age graded ministries and Sunday school. And we're going to do all the things that we can do right. But if that becomes our target, then we're just another business with a religious name.
Yep.
Right? Looking at our books, making sure our offerings are good, making sure our numbers are, and again, I'm not saying those things aren't important, but you better be pursuing the right thing.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's the thing that I have grown through all of these periods of church time and history to realize is that we've got to point people to him. We've got to get people pursuing him. Here's the thing you can't argue with. This is the thing that I love about a message last Sunday, where Peter wanted to really remain in where he was and try to contain that moment, is Peter was pursuing that experience. Mm. In the absence of realizing that Jesus' mission was so much bigger than that. And we have a tendency to do that. We will put our finger on a point in time and we will say, I want to stop. I want to contain. Think about, I just remember saying this about my kids and probably my grandkids now. Man, I just want to freeze time. Have you ever said that? You ever thought about that or said that? I just want to freeze time right now because it can't get any better than this.
Yeah.
So we know we have a tendency to do that. Well, translate that to your church experience, which to a Southern Baptist, Southern Bible Belt Christian believer is a really important experience in your life.
Yeah.
And you have that gospel service and you've got Southern gospel music playing and you've got the Gold City Quartet at your church and you just, man, it's like, woo, it don't get no better than this. Let's just freeze time. It's not saying that wasn't a great experience, but what are you freezing?
Yeah.
Right. So we can't put him in a box,
right,
as much as we would like to. And so I think that's where we have to know our tendencies, and our fleshly tendencies are to want to grab after those things. But our heart always has to, and we always have to be pointing our people toward pursuing Jesus, because you can't argue with that. I'm sure people yesterday could disagree with me, but you can't argue with pursuing Jesus. He has to be our target.
Right.
And if he's our target and we're pursuing him, I had somebody come up to me, an older gentleman in our first service, and say, he appreciated the message, thought it was spot on. He said, Jeff, every day I pray for our staff that our staff would pursue Jesus, because if our staff pursues Jesus, they're going to lead us to pursue Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's it. I said, man, you got it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the target. Our target is Christ.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you, whoever you are.
And that's
seriously.
he's a great
We're
man.
so
He's such a
grateful.
great guy. Yeah, he speaks to me not every Sunday, but a lot of Sundays, and he always has a strong word like that.
Yeah.
Really, really neat guy.
Since we talked last week about what it means to follow Jesus, I've kind of had this picture in my mind. Again, I'm similar to you, very simple-minded in these kind of things. But if you're going to follow somebody, what does that look like? Okay, if Jesus is walking down a path, we're walking behind him,
Yeah.
and we're following. And if we're disciples of him, what he's doing, we're doing. So, kind of the sinner's prayer mentality of I got saved, and then so I'm good. It's like we agreed to get on the path, but Jesus is walking, and we're just sitting here waiting.
Yeah.
In these contexts, I'm thinking, containing is like Jesus is trying to walk down the path, and we want him to stay
Right.
at this experience that
That's
we're
right.
in. And then sometimes I think we're also guilty of we may be following Jesus, but we just want to remain in his presence. So we're just locked in on him. We may be following him great, but we're so locked in on him that we're just watching what he's doing and we're not doing what he's told us to do.
Right.
If we're disciples of Jesus, we're following him on the path. We're taking those steps behind him and pursuing him, but we're also watching the way that he is working and moving and doing ministry. And we are being his hands and feet, not to point that direction to ourselves, but to point people to him.
Right.
And so as we live our lives, it's not just about that one moment. It's not just about being with Jesus. It is about being with Jesus. But as we follow him, we do what he's called us to do as well. So,
And that's discipleship.
yeah.
Discipleship is realizing that there will be a moment in time, and this is what Jesus knew, that he would not be with the disciples.
Yep.
He told them that, and they didn't like it. Like you're following me, just like you said. Like I'm staying right behind you, and but there's going to be a moment when I'm not there,
Yep.
and you need to keep moving forward because other people need to follow you.
Yep.
Because that's what discipleship is. Yep. And the way you're going to know that, and the way that you're going to know you're pursuing the right thing, is that the people behind you are following you and doing those things. That's how you know. So don't get hung up in the glory so much that you don't pursue the mission,
Yep.
right? Because they go hand in hand.
Yep.
When you're in his glory, it fuels you to go pursue his mission, and that is to make disciples.
Absolutely. Well, good stuff. We went a little over our 45 minutes, but I think it's been a good conversation.
Yeah, and we're getting ready to move into Easter already.
Yeah.
And that's
coming
what's
close.
crazy. Like, it comes so quick that we've got 3 Sundays, and I mean, Easter's here, 3 weeks from Sunday.
New sermon series this Sunday.
Yep, I Am will begin this Sunday, and it'll be unique because we're doing some different things throughout the next 3 weeks. But again, we'll continue to, and I think it's been Jesus just planned this way. But when you walk through a gospel, it's hard not to focus on Jesus because it's a gospel. The gospel is his story. But the challenge in all other teachings to make sure it lifts.
It's all a story about him.
It's all his story, The great thing about the epistles, it's great to go into an epistle with a Christ-centered view because it doesn't mean that you've got to force everything to go back. But doing the things that Christ commanded us to do is having a Christ-centered view. Right. So you got to keep that in context. I've been in those environments where I would hear old preachers say every message has to go to the cross. So some guy would be preaching on giving and somehow awkwardly end up at the, and it's like, you don't have to force it. You don't have to force that, man, because us pursuing what he called us to do is lifting him up.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure.
It's because of him that we do these things.
Yeah.
And we're actually going to be getting into that after Easter. After Easter, we're going into a series on disciplines.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be really interesting because, I had a guy say to me, and I know we need to end, but I had a guy say to me a month and a half ago, we were playing golf together, and he said, you don't really talk about giving much, do you? And he was a younger guy. I'm like, that's interesting. I said, well, I mean, I think giving is a hard issue, and I want to get people's heart right. And he goes, yeah, that's good. That's good. He said, but how do I need to do it? And then I thought that's it. That's what I'm missing the point. His heart's right. He just wants to know what to do. And I thought, man, that's why we need to be talking about disciplines.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not because of the have to, but just the biblical instruction.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it mean for me, and what do I need? I want to do what's right.
Yeah.
So she'll help me see what the scripture says.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that series.
That's
It'll be a good series that'll lead us into the summer.
Yeah.
So-
And as we go into Easter, we've got this Sunday. You mentioned the Wednesday nights kind of in between. You may be hitting some of the other points. So,
Yes.
I don't think anybody on the Wednesday night studies would be offended if anybody wanted to go to the Sanctuary Bible Study to hit those, or if anybody's not going on Wednesday nights at all, hit those Wednesday Bible studies.
Yeah, because we won't have a lot of
deeper.
Sundays to hit some of the events
Yeah.
of the last couple weeks of Jesus' life. So I'll be using.
We're on chapter 9 out of 16.
Right.
and
Yeah.
we've got
So it's
3
going to be a little
weeks.
difficult. We're going to have to jump ahead.
Yeah.
So we'll be doing that.
That'd be good. So, well, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.